Well, I started out in the late 90s, and there were big names in poker. Vince Burgio was definitely one of them. He was a guy to be feared back then, but always a likable gentleman, a good role model for young players trying to make a name for themselves in the game.
It's the PokerNews Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very special episode of the PokerNews Podcast, episode 970, presented by FanDuel Poker on PokerStars. I'm Chad Holloway, joined by a special guest here at Level 9 Studio, somebody I'm very excited to talk to, Vince Burgio. You are a legend of poker for me as a poker historian of sorts. We've got a lot of your memorabilia here. You came from California. It's World Series of Poker time. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure, sir.
Yeah, we're going to have a fun talk about yourself, about poker history, about poker before the WSOP is what it is today. You are, like I said, a legend, especially in the 90s, right? Like, we're going to talk about the Binion's Poker Hall of Fame Classic. We're going to talk about the Queen's Poker Classic, a lot of these other events. You're a bracelet winner. This is, I think, the first time we've had a bracelet on the table that wasn't mine, which is very exciting. From 1994, the same year you made the final table of the main event.
Yeah, that was a pretty good year. Plus, I also won the main event at Diamond Jim Brady 3 months later, so that was my year. Yeah,
it was incredible what you did in the 90s. And I talked to a few people at the World Series this year to, reminisce and tell us about Vince Burgio. And, we're going to intersperse those throughout this episode, but talk to Tom McEvoy, talk to Mark Gregorich and others. And so let me start with you from last year. You kind of made an appearance at the World Series of Poker. You played the seniors event. Everybody was super excited to see you. You got to do the shuffle up and deal. What was that like for you to, get that recognition at the World Series of Poker and have so many people reaching out?
Well, it was unique in the sense that I didn't shave that morning, and I figured, nothing's going to happen except something did happen. And last year was a great year. In fact, statistically, it was probably the best I've ever had. I played 6 tournaments, and I cashed in 4 of them. They were all $1,000, and a couple of them were, I think, one was 6 and one was 700. But, statistically, to cash 4 out of 6 tournaments, but wasn't a lot of money, but made me feel like I could still play.
Yeah, which is, and if you don't mind me asking, you're 90, 91?
91.
91, wow.
I was the oldest last year in the seniors, and the super seniors, when we got to the money, I figured this will be a cinch, right? So they started counting like 75, 80, 85. 85, I got up, moving toward the microphone. There was a guy 94.
Oh, no.
How the hell did he get in here?
Your biography, Pizza, Pasta, and Poker, the private and public life of a professional poker player. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
It came out, I think, in 2005.
Right, exactly.
Right around the height of the poker boom. Really documented your life and your journey in poker. So Missouri, but then I know you went up to the Seattle area.
Yeah. A friend of mine owned a bar up there, and I graduated June 6th, and took a plane, got off the plane, and my friend brought me to his bar, and I met his cocktail waitress. And we got together and had a couple kids, and I had a nice short marriage life Seattle was God's country in those days. It really was just beautiful. And they had poker.
You're right.
They had low ball poker, and I did real well with low ball. In fact, I think I was voted the best low ball poker player 2 years in a row. Then they quit having the vote.
Yeah, I was interesting because I was reading your book at the same time as the Texas poker stuff was going on, right? They have poker in Texas, these card rooms that aren't exactly legal, operating in a gray area. And it took me back to your book of Seattle at one time had very similar before it ended up getting shut down.
It was called tolerated.
Mm-hmm.
The poker rooms were tolerated. In fact, they had big signs that said poker, but it wasn't legal.
Right.
And then one day we woke up and it became illegal. And they had to move out of the city limits of Seattle, which is, if I'm not mistaken, is still true to this day, that poker is illegal in Seattle, but you go right outside the city limits and there's several card rooms and poker rooms.
Right. And before that, poker itself, you learned, I think you learned with family, and then really plied your trade when you were in the military.
Yeah. Yeah. Any military service, you have poker games. Before payday, you played payday stakes. And if you were a good poker player, a lot of the guys owed you money, but few of them paid.
Right.
But yeah, that, it was good training for poker.
Yeah.
So.
And then when did it become a more serious endeavor, if you will, where you started playing poker kind of professionally?
Well, when I went to Seattle, I think I worked for Boeing for about a year, and then I was a casualty adjuster, and our office was right across the street from a poker room. So I gravitated in there, and I loved it. In fact, I think I was making $90 a month as an adjuster with company car and all that stuff. But the dealers and the poker were making 3 times that. So I asked the boss, I said, I'd like to be a dealer. Oh, his wife said, you have a degree and you're this. I said, no, I'd like to, I got 2 kids at home. So I'd like to be. So I started dealing. And I like that, but then again, they untolerated poker and they moved out, and then that was it. And then I came down to visit my friend in California, and I met his secretary, and I married her. So my same friend that I had in Seattle, that I married the cocktail waitress, now I married his secretary. So every place he went, I would marry one of his employees.
That's funny. But I know now you've been married for a very long time.
40 years and 5 months.
Wow. That's wild. Your wife, Debbie, who I've been in communication with, she helped arrange this interview. She's in the book. I have to assume she's, been such a big influence, obviously, on you, but just even the poker aspect, because it sounded like she would travel with you, quite a bit back in the day.
Yeah, she's been a godsend to me. She's the love of my life. Yeah. But yeah, we did. In fact, we went on, I think, 8 or 9 poker cruises, and been all over with the poker cruises. And she's been wonderful, and she's been right there next to me.
That's fantastic. You're here now in Las Vegas. It's the 2026 World Series of Poker. We've had this interview on the books for a while. Very excited about it, but I'm curious, are you going to play while you're here?
Yes, I am. And I'm going to play the seniors, super seniors, and probably 4 or 5 other ones, and, maybe play a satellite for the big one. I haven't played the big one for 20 years.
Wow. That is wow. I would love to see you back in it for sure. I mean,
I would too. In fact, my friend Tom McEvoy,
former main event champ.
Yeah, we're real close, but he's wanting to get in. He's saying his last hurrah, and I hope he does. So,
I actually caught up with Tom to talk about you briefly. So I think I'll show that clip right here.
Oh.
So it was a much bigger deal in the 90s than it is now, same as me, for that matter. And he's always been a top player. He's got 1 bracelet, but he's won numerous other tournaments, including some really major no-limit events. And the year Russ Hamilton won the championship in '94, Vince came in 4th, and he never did say what he lost with, but he ran into a big hand. I think he was bluffing or something. He never admitted it. He's one of the really good guys in poker, and he's been a very close friend of mine all these years. He's cost me a lot of money, though, because I keep trading with him, and I keep paying off. So that's happened so many times. If I'd never traded with him, I'd be a lot further ahead financially. But he's a great player and a great human being, and that's the kind of guy I like to hang out with, and I do. We get together quite frequently whenever he's here in town, and we used to be on the same circuit together. I've been to Aruba several times, and he was my roommate there, and we always got along really well and respect each other. And back when I had my own house, he would stay for the whole World Series. And he was the one house guest I never had a problem with. Yeah. He's quiet, kept to himself. But he's written, 2 books, as you are sure aware of, and they're quite interesting. Get another look at what goes inside with the mind of a professional player.
All right, there we are. Thank you, Tom McEvoy, for that. I'll have a few more of those throughout the episode. But let's talk about 1994. You've got some things here, some silver nuggets. You have your bracelet. You made the main event final table there, but let's start with the bracelet. Obviously, winning a World Series of Poker Gold bracelet is the pinnacle for any poker player. What was it like for you to win it? It was the 1,500 7-card stud split for $127,000. Safe to say kind of a life-changing poker moment?
Absolutely. In fact, a couple of years before, I got heads up in the ace to 5. Mm-hmm. In fact, I had my opponent all in 3 times, and I lost all 3 hands. But I thought, I'll never come this close again. And 2 years later, I did. In fact, the final table was filled with Miami John, Howard Leder, 2 or 3 other big name poker players. So it was great. It was life-changing and very fortunate. And then I was having dinner with my friend Howard Tahoe Andrew, who's a famous poker player. And he said, let's play the satellite for the big tournament. I said, okay. So we traded 10% and I won the satellite. So I want to give him $1,000. He said, no. I'll take 10% of you. Well, I did come in 4th, but when we got down to 4-handed, a player named John Spadavecchia and I had about the same chip. So somebody suggested we trade $50,000. I said, well, okay. So I ended up going out next, but I got $218,000, and I had to give Tahoe $21,000.
I did know Tahoe. I met him a few times and interviewed him a few times before he passed away, and a great guy, but he definitely got the good end of that bargain.
Yeah, him and I were close. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. Yeah. Too bad he isn't still alive. He died, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. It was very sad.
He had a record, I think, of most consecutive World Series of Pokers.
I remember that.
Yeah, because most people would have thought it would have been Doyle or somebody else, but a few of those players boycotted Binion's horseshoe.
I remember the year they did.
Yeah, because of the ownership situation, but Tahoe played throughout. So.
Yeah.
I'm looking at that final table. Obviously, now in poker lore, 1994 is infamous for the winner that year, Russ Hamilton, and that whole situation. What was it like kind of back then? Obviously, none of that stuff had happened, and I'm assuming Russ back then was, just part of the poker community. I know one of the stories from that final table was they won. If you were to win, you would win your weight in silver, which was a bad beat for the horseshoe because Russ was probably 300 pounds.
Exactly.
And a guy like you was a lot less.
Yeah, they weighed us in before it was commemorating the silver anniversary, obviously. But yeah, they were, Benny had just died a couple years before, but Jack was there and supposedly, he really cared where he gave several $1 million, I'm sure. But that was a big deal.
Yeah, I think it's a dream of everybody to make the main event final table at some point, and
especially when you get in on the satellite.
Yes,
you're in 200.
Yeah,
but miracles happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at Chris Moneymaker was on a satellite and won it in 2003, and totally changed poker. Along those lines, you were still active and playing poker regularly when that happened. Your book came out in 2005, which was perfect timing because the height of the poker boom. But what was it like for you as somebody who, played in the 90s? The fields were much smaller than they are now. The main event, the year you final table, 268 runners, over 10,000 last year. What was it like for you as somebody who's seen the before and now the after of the explosion of poker?
I think that year that Chris Moneymaker came in, they interviewed me before the tournament, and they said we were going from about 250, 300 players to 500, 600, 700. And they interviewed me, and they said, well, what does it feel like? I said, it feels like going to the gallows. In other words, I thought 500 now, with the thousands of people, and just like the seniors last year, and I was disappointed. I outlasted, according to my son-in-law, outlasted 98% of the people, and I think I cashed for like 6,000, 7,000 or whatever it was. But so many people, and it's such a different thing now.
Yeah.
It's just, some ways I guess it's good, in other ways I don't know.
Well, I mean, that's one of the reasons I was so excited to get you into the studio is that, for me, poker history is so important. A lot of people walk so people could run now, so to speak, as the saying would go. And, from Doyle and the Texas Road Gamblers in the 70s, and you have, Jack Strauss and Jack Keller in the 80s, even Hellmuth towards the end of that. And then in the 90s, you are right up there as the people I think when I think of poker in the 90s and helped usher it along.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah.
Brad Doherty won the main event in 91. Hamid Desmalchi was, did you know Hamid at all, by the way?
No.
Yeah.
Brad and I were best friends. He lives in the Philippines now. He's happily married and so forth. And he was here 2 years ago. In fact, he stayed at my condo for a couple months and so forth. But he's happily married. In fact, he's got a couple kids.
Oh, nice. I was so thrilled you brought in a bunch of the things that you have here. As I said, I love poker history. I've heard about the Hall of Fame Poker Classic, which was at Binion's Horseshoe. I've never seen a trophy before, and that's real silver in there, right?
Yeah, there's only 14 of them, and Tom McEvoy's got one.
Yeah.
I think Johnny Chan's got one.
Well, I moved to Vegas in 1995 and immediately started playing both cash games and tournaments with Vince. We played a lot of 08 together over the years, and I think two things that really stuck out for me about Vince is one is that he was pure class. He always conducts himself as like an absolute gentleman, and that wasn't always the case with everybody back in those days, or now I guess, but Vince was absolutely somebody that I looked up to in terms of how he conducted himself at the table. And then the other thing is he was extremely hard to ever get a chip out of. He's one of the toughest players he never put money in bad. So he was a very, very challenging opponent to play against.
Tell me about, is it a Remington? Is it the bicycle casino where they used to give those away?
No, that's the Commerce.
Commerce, yes.
In fact, this is the World Championship of Lowball, I think, I forgot what year it was.
Sure.
But I have two of them. I gave one away, but this one's very unique. In fact, in the Oval Office at the White House, for years, they had this. And like I said, very unique, and I'm very proud of this. It weighs about 20 pounds or so. Yeah, that was the what was it called? Anyway, it's the Commerce tournament.
Sure. It's definitely one of the coolest poker trophies that exist.
Yeah.
And I'm familiar with them and very high marks. And let's talk about the Wheaties box. Tell me the story behind this.
Well, I'm embarrassed to say I forgot who gave me it. But one of my kids or grandkids,
Sure.
Somebody gave me that box, and I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
It's
You could have one too. Just send them whatever it is.
I love it. And is that your winner's photo from the bracelet, or is it just a regular photo?
I don't. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Come to
I
think of
see
it,
it on the wrist there.
Yeah.
And like we said, you brought the bracelet. The bracelet here is really cool. It has your name on it. It looks like there's a little diamond above the eye.
Yeah, I dotted the I with the little diamond. Yeah.
And then there's a little horseshoe right there on the top right-hand corner.
Right. That's in commemoration of the 25th anniversary. And then, as I told you earlier, they gave you, if you made a final table, they gave you a little silver ingot, which is over there. And I think it's an ounce of silver. So I got a couple of those.
Very cool. It says 377 of 600. So they didn't do 1 ounce Troy silver. It's got the horseshoe binions on it. This is very cool. Mm-hmm. And this, I noticed the bracelet says Neiman Marcus too, which is a much higher end than the ones they make these days.
Yeah, I haven't seen one lately.
Yeah. Another thing I know you're particularly proud of is, you have to tell me the story. It was you basically won back-to-back-to-back tournaments, which is very rare in the poker world. As somebody who's reported thousands of tournaments, I've seen it maybe once or twice. But you did it. And when was that exact? Was it 2005?
6, something like that.
Yeah.
Well, what's unique about it now is most of the tournaments don't end in one day.
Right.
But I remember talking about the World Series. Well, when I won my bracelet, I wanted it 3 or 4 in the morning, and every one of them would end at 3 or 4. I don't know if yours was, 2 days for the employees.
Yep, it was 2 long days. Now it's even more. I think it goes into 3 days now.
Yeah. So that's why that record would be hard to beat.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm looking over some of the other results from that series because this is from Card Player Magazine. Michael Mizrachi, he won the main event last year. He won a title at this 20 years ago.
Yeah, he's a phenom.
Yeah, we'll get into it a little bit later in the episode. I want to ask you about some of the players, some young and old, because you were such a I'm going to say like this unique situation in the poker world where you almost bridged the old timers, if you will, in terms of Doyle and the Texas road gambling kind of crew into literally the poker boom.
I played with him in his prime, like late 90s, early 2000s, and he had started poker late, and he was like a regular at everything. And he started at a very late age, and he was just killing everything for, 10, 15 years in that little period. And then he just completely dropped off the map. I don't know what happened. I did see him here like a year or two ago, and we talked, and we reminisced, whatever. But I know he's famous for that book, Pizza and Poker, or something like that. And it's a pretty funny book if you want to read it. So.
Like, what was it like? What was Johnny Moss like? Obviously, he was long gone by the time I came around, but such a legend in the poker world.
The grand old man of poker.
Yep.
He used to bring his wife, who would sit right next to him. And for the first few years I played, my wife would come and she would sit quite a ways away and read. And a lot of the players got to know her, and that was nice. But Johnny, his wife, to the last day, and of course, being the person he was in poker, she sat right next to him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anybody else that they would allow that to happen. But Johnny was a man of few words. And of course, I didn't know him, earlier than, I guess, 87, 88
Sure.
was my first year. But talking about what I'm proud of is, I did not play a poker tournament until I was 52 years old. and I remember playing with Phil when he was just starting. And he was, I love Phil, I really do.
And Phil Hellmuth?
Yeah, Phil. But he was brash, and I remember saying, they'll eat him up alive. Well, he's eating us up alive.
Vince Burgio, just tough. Always a tough player. Played with him in the 90s, the 2000s, 2010s. And, I think Perry Green's 90. And Perry Green just made a final table. And I think of Vince Burgio, who's 91. And Vince just always plays tough. I always liked him. He probably thought I was a little rough around the edges, but I think he knows I have a good heart.
But, that's and some of the older, Puggy Pearson and some of those guys, I wasn't quite in with them.
Sure.
But that next wave of Phil, and then Daniel and Phil Ivey came along, and Mizrachi and that group, and of course I started writing for Card Player in 1998, and I wrote I wrote over 100 columns,
Mm-hmm.
but some of them were. One of them was, I'll never forget, was Jumping Jacks. And we were playing a tournament, I think, at the Orleans. And Daniel, and my article was about who gets up the most. Daniel won it hands down.
Yeah.
He was up like 42 times. But
you mentioned, I think earlier, and he's gone now, unfortunately, but certainly a character of the game, John Bonetti.
John and I were very good friends. In fact, when he got initiated into the Seniors Hall of Fame, Phil Hellmuth was supposed to do the, I forgot what word you could, initiation or speech in front of him.
Sure.
And Phil was in a tournament. So I was the second choice. And I remember and he sent me a big basket. He was so appreciative. But I remember one of the things I said about John was he was a heck of a competitor. And I said, no quarter asked, no quarter given. And he loved that because he had the reputation of, he could get a little bit frisky, you know. But It was true. He would do that, but he would lose like a gentleman and get out of there.
A gentleman I did get to know, and he unfortunately passed away last year, but I got to know him really well over the last several years, and he such an influence on the game, Jack McClelland. Did you have much interaction with Jack over the years?
Absolutely. It was when you won a tournament or cashed big, you took care of Jack, because in '94, I got comped to the Binion Steakhouse 5 times. My daughter, my son-in-law, a couple other people. I mean, Jack would get you whatever you wanted. And, I love Jack. And then, of course, he lost a lot of weight and had heart problems.
Mm-hmm.
But, and I remember his first wife, Alma, who she passed away. But yeah, Jack was a wonderful, wonderful man and did a great job.
He played poker right up to the end, which I just loved. And another person who played poker right up to the end that I want to ask if you had any interactions with over the years was Doyle Brunson, of course.
Yeah. My story about Doyle was we were playing in the World Series. And at the time, as I said earlier, the tournaments lasted one day, except the final one. One day. So we're playing, and Doyle were at the same table, and he said, Vince, you play a lot of these tournaments. Do you think the tournament should last more than one day or go into the second day? And I said, well, it really doesn't bother me. After that, I went over to my wife and I said, next year the tournaments will be 2 days long. Doyle had the ear of Jack and anybody else. And yeah, Doyle was a good player.
If I remember reading in the book correctly, is like you started to write this book before poker took off. But then when poker took off, you're like, I better get this book finished because now is the right time to publish it.
Well, that's another story. I don't know if you like stories or not.
Oh, of course we do.
But I got, at the Commerce one year, I got heads up with Phil Ivey, 80,000 first, 42nd. And when we were three-handed, he got all in, and he could have very easily got knocked out, but he didn't. And then I got heads up with him. When the tournament was over, we were cashing in. And Daniel, he was a good friend of Phil's, he was right by it, cashing in. And I said, God, I'm glad that's over. I said, I was really, really beat. And Daniel wrote some kind of article where he said, he alluded to the fact that I came in second, and Phil, and he said, but Vince is going to have to deal with getting older. So when I saw him, I said, Daniel, I said, I was tired because I was up all night the night before. I forgot what I was doing, probably arguing with my wife.
Well, I started out in the late 90s, and there were big names in poker. Vince Burgio was definitely one of them. I remember playing with him at the Four Queens when they had tournaments and pretty much all over the tour. And he was a guy to be feared back then, but always a likable gentleman, a good role model for young players trying to make a name for themselves in the game.
I exercise a lot. I walk like 6-7 miles a day and still, but I don't get tired. In fact, even last year, a couple times played all the way to 2 a.m. and a lot of guys that are much younger than I am. And I'm just lucky, really. Just lucky.
I was going to literally ask you that. Was one of my questions here today is like, what's the secret? What do you do? Because and I'm sure a lot of other people who are watching, listening, want to be playing poker well into their later years and playing effectively, which you still do. And I know from, speaking with your wife, an annual tradition for you and your family is putting up a huge display of Christmas decorations and Christmas lights, and that you were at 91 up on the roof this past Christmas still doing it.
I was 90. It was last year, and I got the front page of the Valley or the Daily News in LA because they did an article on me 30 years ago, and they had an article in the present edition, and they said, any unique stories? So my wife called him and said, you did an article on my husband 30 years ago, and he's still playing poker, and he's 90. And they said, oh, really? Can we talk to him? And my wife said, he's up on the roof putting decorations. They said, really? Can we come over and interview him?
I'm glad that, you get that recognition. I was really thrilled when I had heard last year when you were in the seniors event, I think it was Alan Kessler who had tweeted out that, you were in the field, and I knew the name from, like poker history. That's when I came up to you, and I think I introduced myself, took a picture, and then was thrilled to see the WSOP kind of recognize you the following day.
Yeah.
Being the lover of poker history that I am, I want to make sure that, players aren't forgotten if they deserve to be remembered and honored and recognized, right, with their accomplishments. And, getting to talk with you here today is a real treat for me. One of the other things I've done in the past is, Bob Hooks. I don't know if you were familiar with Bob Hooks, but he was in the 70s, WSOP. People thought he had passed away, but I managed to track him down. And, I just love the poker history aspect because you were in a time before people documented everything, or everything was filmed. Some of it was, but not as much as it is nowadays. And so to get the stories, to hear about what Doyle was like, or Johnny Moss, to hear what Daniel and Phil Ivey were like in their younger days, like this is the stuff that people, myself included, really love.
Is Phil still around? I don't see Phil.
He's over there. Yeah, he's still doing his thing. People love Phil Ivey, Daniel Negreanu, Phil Hellmuth. Those are three of the biggest names, if not the biggest names in poker nowadays. And you were there when they were nobodies.
Yeah. No, it was such a different world. It was, a lot of people have said it, but it was kind of like a fraternity. You come to the World Series and you know people from all over the country, and you hadn't seen them since last year. And it was different. And there was, I won't say camaraderie, but there was. It was, certainly the better players, you'd end up playing with them. And now, of course, it's a madhouse. Well, I guess there's 100 bracelets this year.
There is, yeah. Back then, like in 94, I could look it up. There was probably, 14? Dozen? 14, yeah.
I'm going to say that. I don't know.
It's probably about right. That's what it seemed like it was in the 90s. So,
and it was only 3 weeks long.
Yeah, and it was earlier, right? It was like in April, May instead of June, July.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And also, of course, it was at Binion's Horseshoe, which it hasn't been there since 2004. I outgrew that, went to the Rio for 20-ish years, and now we're at Paris in Horseshoe, the new Horseshoe on the Strip. But Binion's Horseshoe, obviously the Horseshoe is still there. It's not what it probably used to be, but at the time, it was the center of the poker universe. I'm envious of people who got to experience those days at Binion's Horseshoe.
Well, there's another story that I thought about telling, which was, I think it was in the last year they had a World Series at Binion's. Nolan Dalla, who ran everything there,
he was the longtime media director. He's like a mentor for me.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Nolan, one of my better friends.
So I normally don't do these poker things anymore, but when I heard this is Vince Burgio, and he's 91. Well, I just have to say something about Vince, who was always been a very kind, compassionate, caring person who not just loved the game and worked pretty much all his life to make it better, but he really worked actively for the players, trying to create better structures and reduce the takeout on the buy-ins and all kinds of things that were player friendly that a lot of people did not know he did behind the scenes. And he was always there at tournaments almost every night, pressing the flesh, talking to people, advocating for players, doing things that nobody saw. And as a writer, when I started out in poker, he was always very encouraging to my Player of the Year rankings, to any new person who would come in and try to make the game better. Vince Burgio was there for us, made the game indelibly better and certainly more popular. He's one of the pioneers, and shout out to Vince Burgio, who I have great respect and admiration for.
This book in particular, anybody who's watching or listening, I highly recommend it because it's such a great, I'm going to say, historical document for this period of poker from, say, 1990 to 2005. Of course, it talks about your life, which is very interesting in itself, but that poker period, which is often underrepresented and wasn't captured, I think this book captures it perfect and bridges that gap, as I said, from the Doyle, Johnny Moss, Puggy Pearson era to the Phil Ivey, Phil Hellmuth, Daniel Negreanu, by somebody who was there, not only just there, but competing against these guys successfully. Hopefully we'll have more interviews in the future. But for this sit down, I do want to ask, looking back at your poker career and, you're still in it right now, you're kind of having a resurgence in terms of getting some notoriety and whatnot. But what do you want your poker legacy of sorts to be? I know that's kind of a bigger question, but from your perspective, what kind of mark do you hope to leave on the game, or do you think you've left on the game? Because I know you have. I'm telling you, as somebody who's sitting here and has studied poker, devoted my career to it, I know the mark that you've left, and I just want to kind of hear it from your perspective.
It reminds me of one of my favorite movies, Saving Private Ryan.
Mm-hmm. Great movie.
The whole movie is about saving guys dying to save this guy who had lost 3 or 4 brothers, and the government said, get him out of there. But at the end of the movie, he's at the cemetery in France with his wife, and he's looking at the graves, and he gets emotional, and he looks at his wife, and he says, just tell me I was a good man. And I always thought of that. So when you ask me that, I would say, Vince, he was a good player and a good man.
It's been an absolute pleasure. One of my favorite guests that I've ever had in 970 episodes of the
kidding. Show. Gee, I appreciate that. Wow.
Yeah. We will be back on Saturday with a brand new episode. Until then, we'll keep a seat open for you.